Gardiner is a SAFE fellow, SPCT. I can't say there's exactly a litany of that certification out there in the space. They're not exactly a dime a dozen. And I know that it's hard earned and hard studied to be able to have that certification. And so he comes as a strategic advisor, focusing on real outcomes there for safe implementations in very large organizations. Over a decade of experience that he brings with us, everything from strategy to execution and really helping the business think about new ways of delivering the work and strategizing the work. And of course, it's all about building and creating value right across the organization. And SAFE will make it very clear that everything really drills down to customer centricity. Talk a lot about the flow. Phil's got all that, and he's steroids times 50 as far as I'm concerned. With my experience there, I'm a little bit newer in the space
We
here.
we all start at the same place, man.
Hey, that's okay, but I want to be with the MVPs, the ones that got it, that bring me up, okay? That's where I'm coming from. So I'm grateful to have him here. And so thank you again, Phil. And with all of your safe training, and you also do consulting as well.
Yeah, I'll
So
explain
you
that in
are a
just a second.
consultant and you're very predominant in the area of Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. I certainly imagine you're probably on travels as well, all over the country. So this is not the only place space you're in, so you're elsewhere. So without further ado, I give you
Yeah.
Mr. Phil Gardner.
Thank you for that humbling intro. I've been a fellow long enough that I've gotten used to it, but not so long that I expect it. So thank you. I'm going to go through the deck fairly quickly and then we'll have time for Q&A. I like meetups because I get to let my guard down a little bit, be a little bit more editorial. I will still work really hard to tell you when it's my opinion. When we think about this whole topic of safe is dead, I've been involved in safe since 2013 and I've seen its evolution. I adopted safe for a different reason. So that's colored my entire approach to safe for the last decade or more. And for me, I went to safe because I saw it as a way to avoid AT&T's Agile Police. I was an AT&T employee for 16 years. I was part of a lauded as very successful transformation. And then once the army of coaches left, it imploded. And it didn't implode because we didn't have great Scrum. We had 60 plus teams that were amazing Scrum. We had some of the biggest names in Agile coaching at the time back in 2009, 2010, who were helping us. And we did awesome with Scrum. But we had a PMO that didn't believe in transparency. We had a design group of 7 or 8 people called the Blueprint team that needed to bless all design for all 60 teams. So bottlenecks, right? So some of the things that lead Scrum to work didn't necessarily lead to success at scale. And what I learned since then, and I've worked with Scrum at Scale, Less, Nexus, Spotify-ish, and the things that make safe work can make those work. The things that prevent safe from working will also prevent those from working. So when I hear things like safe's no good, I can make the same argument for any other framework. But at the same time, there's lots of success stories out there. And so when we look at this idea of safe maturing, it's moving away from some of the things that allowed it to be very successful in 2015 doesn't really cut it here in 2025. Now, when I started, as I mentioned, we had a COE that had checklists and policy documents. And if they heard the word Agile, they smelled Agile, they descended like locusts and they would they'd evaluate you. Did you ask the 3 questions in the official AT&T form? You did not. Demerit. Do you have everything in the tooling? So it was the process side of things. And they would rank, you would be bronze, silver, or even gold, depending on how well you implemented the agile model that they had defined. And I got tagged to be part of a startup. And the vision was, can we create a place inside AT&T to get into this new big data space? This is in 2013, that's just emerging, and create a business inside AT&T around big data. And we were given the top cover to say, forget about AT&T, forget about our culture and all that stuff. Whatever you need, run it like a startup. And we did. And by 2015, we had 500 or some odd employees. 350 of them had been trained in leading Safe 3 and then 4. And back then, we still hadn't launched an art. We didn't launch our first art until the summer of 2014. And what they learned, though, was that exposing people to the values and principles, specifically the SAFE principles, seeded our culture and influenced how we approach things. 90% of our teams were Kanban, not Scrum, which back when SAFE first got started wasn't an official thing. But the result was we hit 240% of our target on year 2. That was from leveraging SAFE, not as a process, but as a way of working powered by values and principles. And I've been able to replicate that success story, and more importantly, been able to support people who replicate it, because somewhere on my journey, I tell people when I left AT&T in 2015 to be a consultant, I was awesome. Now I'm pretty good. And what I've learned is that these aren't my transformations. These aren't my implementations. They're yours. They're my clients. And so I've learned to support that. And so just to understand where I sit in the ecosystem is my clients are sometimes SAFE partners. Sometimes they're government employees and government agencies. Sometimes they're state-based agencies, procurement officers, contracting officers, CIOs. And I usually come in and help enable those people and help them have success with their implementation. And so I don't call myself a coach. I'm more of call me what I am, a consultant, an advisor, et cetera. All this to say, what it does give me is a wide variety of examples and what being able to see patterns and practices that work and what doesn't work. And so when we think about SAFE maturing, what we're seeing is a need to go beyond IT. I've been lucky, or whatever reason, my path took me where the business is what I'm usually involved in, right? So IT starts the transformation, complains the business isn't engaged, and then business gets engaged and IT scrambles to keep up. That's the pattern I see over and over again. And so understanding what works and why is something that's so critical to scale. Back in 2015, there wasn't a lot of extra information about. Thank you for that information, Ross. I wasn't sure the exact number. We've launched it once and it's working. So now, because SAFE worked in this business unit, we're going to do it there and there, never realizing that there's things besides the framework that actually let something work. And the last piece here, this idea of as SAFE matures, it's not about the arts and the teams and what you have and how they work. It's about the outcomes that way of working gets you. I'm doing a series of talks and blogs with this. My 2025 on the top of my mind is this idea of let's move from arts to outcomes, shift the focus from how many arts you have to what outcomes you're accomplishing, to mission success. What are those different things that you're looking for? And so when we think about SAFE and you talk to the new chief methodologist, Andrew Sales, and you watch some of his keynotes, you'll see this trend towards the business, the trend towards there's 2 workshops that are coming out, measuring the business benefits of SAFE and measuring the mission benefits of SAFE. This tailors specifically of the government. And it's this idea of being able to move that. So when we look at the shift here, organizations these asks aren't necessarily ever changed, right? How fast can we solve these real problems? Where are the outcomes? Those questions have always been asked. The part that may not have always happened is the connectivity between those questions being asked by your senior leaders, your board of directors, right? Your PEO digital, your brigadier general. Those questions have always been asked. Congress, right? But when it comes to execution, those questions aren't part of the forefront. Instead, the focus is on what features are we doing? Not just what features you're doing, but how do these features move the strategy of the agency, the strategy of the company forward? And so what we're finding success patterns, strategy, you've got to have that and you already do. Leadership, you've got to have that and you already do. And execution, you've got to have that and you already do, but they're disconnected. And so if you can get good continuity and flow going that uses all 3 of those pieces of success, and then you look at the measurable outcomes, you can have some serious success. Now, I've been teaching this new offering from Scaled Agile a couple times. I really enjoyed it. It's called Advanced SPC. Now, they've recently made a change that changed it from that sounds like a cool class I choose to take, and they changed it into that sounds like a class I have to take, mainly because they've announced that they're going to tie that to more advanced classes. What I'll tell you is that the ASPC, at least when I teach it, I taught it 3 times or 4 times so far. I've had a small group, 6, 10 people, and I've been lucky, in my opinion. All of them have been experienced SPCs. They don't necessarily do talks, and some of them are consultants, some of them are internal change agents. But what I've seen from every single one of them is they're doing their best and they've had some success and they're hungry to learn. And when you have that class with that audience, it's amazing. They learn from each other. It's a lot about the soft skills. How do you talk to executives? How do you frame things? How do you show up differently? What are some ways to actually get senior leadership understanding of the impact of implementing safe versus just saying, oh, this is the way to do it. Trust me, agile's the way to go. You want agile, you want safe. This is because these principles matter. It's actually a little bit more than that. So here are some leading metrics. As we look at measuring our new way of working, we have these leading metrics. How do those leading measures tie into the lagging measures that the business or the agency is looking for? And sometimes we start implementing safe without measuring anything. And so instead, we want to have metrics and understand and define those up front. If you want more information on that, we can talk more about the Q&A, or you can start looking for the transformation canvas that Scaled Agile's got available now. But that's part of where I'm going with that is that ASPC class is designed to help people better understand how to interact with individuals outside of the traditional IT working groups and agile teams. It's actually, how do you deal with stakeholders? How do you deal with business execs? How do you deal with compliance and other things like that you will encounter on your journey to implement this? Now, Scaled Agile released their State of Safe 2025. 85% of the organizations out there that have implemented SAFe are past their initial launch. It is absolutely out there. Only a third have mature portfolio management. Now, personal opinion, I doubt it's a lot less. I personally suspect it's less than that based on your definition of maturity. To me, the definition of maturity is not, are they doing value stream funding? To me, the definition of maturity is, how much potential investment did they pivot away from or even stop? That's one of the ways I look at portfolio maturity. And outside of SAFe, the term we're hearing more and more is strategic portfolio management. Inside SAFe, they kind of coined the frame lean portfolio management. It's all the same. It's really, though, about how much are you actually investing like you're on Shark Tank versus investing where the money is just there. Lots and lots of feedback out there, simplification, flexibility, and an outcome focus. That's what the State of Safe said and what they've gotten back. Now, this next slide is what Blake passed on to me, what you, the audience, said you wanted. You talked about waterfall leadership in disguise, politics overriding principles, senior leadership misalignment, dependency overload, KPI inflation without outcome traction. I probably want to ask about that in the Q&A a little bit. Product teams not bought in, and LPM and VMO misfire. So when I created this talk, I actually put those things into my thinking process. So I'm hoping I'll address most of those as we go through here. If we don't, we have time during Q&A. I'll tell you, I've definitely seen all of those. There are some words that I personally have not brought into my consulting work. As an SPCT, the SPCT certification is jointly held between a Scaled Agile Gold or Platinum partner and an individual, which means that as a person, if I want to leverage my SPCT, I have to do that through a partner. And partners are people that spend 30 grand, 60 grand, whatever a year to Scaled Agile in exchange for some benefits and things like that. Part of the work I do is valuable. It allows me to teach public classes. I do some consulting. The other side, though, I have my own little LLC where I'm doing kind of that higher end consulting, where sometimes it's white label. I'll show up on somebody else's brand. Sometimes I'll consult with Scaled Agile. Sometimes I'll consult directly with an agency. And so all that to say that lots of experience in these different things. I'll talk more about the waterfall piece in just a couple minutes. Let's see here. Yeah, thanks, Ross. So when we look at this, safe is dead, long live safe, right? It's continuously evolving. Andy Sales was kind of Dean Leffingwell, who created SAFe, his right-hand man for many years. And when Dean stepped out of the picture, spent time with his grandkids, retirement, Andy kept his torch burning. But as a fellow, we're the ones that we get to collaborate with Scaled Agile. We bring in what patterns we're seeing, kind of that thought leadership part of the community. And what I've seen is Andy has a vision, and it's pretty awesome. And you're seeing a shift. It's now him and the men and women on the framework team. They're responding to the market quicker with what they're looking for. And as SAFE is evolving and being needed outside of just IT, the framework is responding to that. And so what you're gonna see is a lot more content around measurable business results, the whole idea of product. And I'm gonna dig into all three of these things a little bit deeper in a minute. But we've talked about, SAFE since 5.0 in 2020 has said customer centricity. But in my personal experience, product management has been a soft spot for so many SAFE implementations. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But you can say customer centricity, but not have the mechanisms to truly allow you to create that connective tissue between you and what your customer is looking for. And then finally, this idea of mastery over ceremony and kind of knowledge versus understanding, that wisdom. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. So one of the big changes that just came, leap number one here, is that we're moving away from this idea of these 7 core competencies. Those were framed as these are the 7 muscle groups you want to build around a customer-centric organization. It wasn't flexible, in my personal opinion, it wasn't really flexible enough, and you didn't know which ones to take and when. And Andy and the team have moved to this idea of disciplines. So you're going to see more and more of this as classes get updated, as Scaled Agile puts more stuff out. But it's this idea of these 5 SAFE disciplines. And you recognize a couple of them, right? Lean portfolio management, team and technical agility. But then you've got product development flow, large solution integration, and then leadership and culture. And all of these things work together. There's going to be 9, 10, I don't know if there's a set number, but I think it's 10 competencies per discipline. So you're going to end up with a wide variety of guidance around how do you actually mature and excel in these different disciplines. Now, if you've watched any of my talks, like on the SPC journey, I did a whole series about, okay, you're an SPC, you're an SPC, so what? Or I'm sorry, now what? You're an SPC, now what? It's the beginning of your journey, not the end. And one of the things I talk about a lot is find that thing that you're passionate about, that you're good at. And the very first webinar I did with that had Harry Konerman, one of the framework team members, one of the core creators of the framework. His expertise is in large cyber physical systems, lean systems engineering, things like that. And we were doing this webinar, and I was talking about how I was working with this missile warning system with the Space and Missile Systems Center back in the day. And they started asking me questions that were above my head. So instead of going and looking it up and telling them what SAFE says, I brought in Harry. And I told the major I was working, the colonel, lieutenant colonel that I was working with, I'm like, I can tell you how this works, and I can tell you all the academic stuff around it, but I haven't done it. And so here's Harry. Talk to Harry. Harry's done this before. When I shared that story, Harry said, yeah, and don't ask me about LPM, ask Phil. And so here's 2 SAFE fellows talking about the fact that they are not masters of all. I see that behavior more in SAFE fellows, a little less in SPCTs, a little less in SPCs. And regardless of where you're on your journey, know it's okay to not be a master of all of these. You want to understand them all, but you're going to, as the framework evolves and evolves, you're not going to be able to be a master of all. And part of that comes from wisdom, from this idea of SPCs with wisdom. And certifications, credentials are starting points, but they're not destinations. And experience is there's a certain type of expertise that you only gain through experience. And practical knowledge, it trumps theoretical understanding. And find your own style. I was there when NASA was first experimenting with SAFE. I had some people go through my training class. It turned into some cool discussions. I did a value stream identification workshop, and the associate director of that part of NASA said, we're doing this. Now, I worked for a big defense contractor, and there's 0 chance that they were going to bring in that defense contractor who was fulfilling the work and also be the one advising the work. So they brought in another company to serve as the coach. And the guy that they brought in was a steamroller. And this is a guy that basically, the persona is, you're very lucky to have me. I'm an SPCT. I'm an expert. I've done this 1,000 times. Do exactly what I say, and you will do just fine. You will excel. The sky is the limit as long as you listen to me. Whereas I'm more in the middle ground. And then there's some coaches out there. What do you think the right thing to do is? That's the right thing to do. Whatever you think the right thing to do is the right thing to do for you. And so you got that steamroll on one side, a super coach on the other. And I find that I'm not the steamroller. I'm also not the coach. I'm the one that really I acknowledge the pragmatism, but I do believe that change lasts longer when somebody opts in. And so that's my personal style. My point here is that you want to find that right intent and approach. I had an opportunity to catch up with this particular associate director last year at the summit. And I asked him, I'm like, hey, why did you keep me around after you hired? And he said, you needed somebody to pick up the pieces. And he told me, he said, my team was very resistant. And so I intentionally brought somebody in that would tell everybody what to do so that we could just roll through it. And what I've learned over the years is you're never going to be the perfect SPC for everybody. And find those that you are the right one for. And if you're listening to this meetup recording and you're looking at bringing in an SPC, find the one that works for you. Find the one that believes in your mission, who's there for the right reasons, but also one that's transparent about their experience. I successfully helped that missile warning system, even though I did not have steep cyber physical solution train experience. I had lots of solution train experience, but I didn't have it with the cyber physical system. And so what I found is that I've never been fired for saying I don't know. In fact, that actually builds trust. So we want SPCs with the wisdom to know what they know and what they don't know, and that hunger to learn. So leap two kind of bridges into that. And that's this idea of product thinking in a safe world. And I did a talk on this recently. Scaled Agile's put out an executive briefing. Mark Ricks is a voice of product there on the framework team. He's done some amazing stuff. He's definitely been carrying that torch about how do we actually get the business to understand the value that safe can brings. And it's not talking about agile release trains and talking about how cool it is to have Scrum or Kanban, right? They speak a different language. And what are those customers' problems? How do we test our assumptions? How are we measuring things, right? Moving from outputs to outcomes. This idea of market fit over velocity. I mentioned earlier that I believe that product is a soft spot. I've now had the honor of mentoring 3 people from the what is safe to I'm an SPCT now. And that's been one of my favorite parts of my career is being able to join these, just happen to be gentlemen on their journey and see them out there. One of them's now working at Scaled Agile. He's retired Army. And I remember the conversation. He's like, why'd you pick me? I didn't, and I picked you because of your attitude, your integrity, your communication. Teaching you safe's the easy part. Teaching you those soft skills that you learned as an Army intelligence officer, that's a lot harder. And he's now a strategic advisor for Scaled Agile. His name's Travis Moore. But anyway, my point on that is that in all 3 of their journeys, a soft spot was product. And this is something that is not related to them. It's something that I've seen over and over again. And what happens is there's this mad scramble to launch the art and have features. And the person who's put in place to be the product manager for the art may not have any product background from the standpoint of product management, product development background. They may have been responsible for a product in a waterfall type sense, but this whole idea of I need to do some analysis and market segmentation. I need to create personas and keep them persistent and up to date. I need to know when I need to invest in market research versus user research. I need to think about the value exchange models that are in place. I need to conduct customer benefit analysis. All of these things are way outside the scope oftentimes, not to mention the experience of people who are put into that product management role. And so what ends up happening is you end up getting the safe mechanics going and you're having success, but then there ends up being this friction, this tension between what you need in order to serve your warfighter, what you need in order to serve your markets and your customers, and on the private sector side, in order to be profitable. On the government side, in order to be efficient, in order to be able to save as many lives as possible, increase our security, whatever, or care for your constituents if you're at the state level. And so what you're seeing here, these are product thinking pieces that fall between the cracks of implementing SAFE as a process. And you're going to see more and more of this. And what we're seeing in the private sector is a trend. It left the door open for consulting companies to come in and say, hey, move to a product operating model. Yes, exactly. And I was in the background pinging him left and right. John, do a search for, if later on, if you want to get to know the real Travis, go to YouTube and look up this. Search for this
Okay.
at SPC Journey. There's a whole
SPCT.
series of webinars, and I
Wow.
interviewed Travis on two of them. The first one was him telling his story about
Wow.
when SAFE clicked for him. And he says in there, some things are taught and some things are caught. The other one was later on, I interviewed Adam Mattis and him from a standpoint of, I'm an SPC and a veteran. And we were able to actually, Scaled Agile helped sponsor this. We were able to get some military personnel in transition into an implementing SAFE class for free. It was pretty cool. Anyway, there's a squirrel. So that's the second one. This the importance of product thinking. And if you're implementing SAFE now, if you have an implementation now, just know that if you never care for the product management side of things, it opens the door to somebody else saying, hey, we're this big, your company's board of directors has a strategic advisory consulting company, and they might say, you need to implement a product operating model. Next thing you know, you're reorganizing around products, and you're sitting there going, wait, we have products here in SAFE. So we're trying to raise awareness that it's always been in the framework, but for whatever reason, it gets left out. And so product thinking is absolutely important. Third, along those lines, it's not about more ceremonies. It's not about more process. It's more about removing obstacles. I'm doing a government talk. I should know when it is. I'm doing a lot of talks this month. Where is it? No, I don't. I lost it. Anyway, it's, I guess, next week sometime on Government Insider. And we'll be talking about Doge a little bit and the impact of Doge, some of the things that's bringing to the table, things like shift churn from people leaving or losing their jobs and doing more with less, and the scrutiny of efficiency and things like that. But when we look at what's on the screen here, why will work matters, aligning them. That's something the government has. It's so powerful, is that it's about the mission. Regardless of who pays your check, most of the government people, contractors or employees that I met or military personnel, it's about the mission. If you can harness that inside the private sector, you're going to have a much different experience with SAFE. But you're always looking at the flow. You're looking on the real needs that are out there, which kind of, when we think about the real needs that are out there, outcome-driven LPM. Now, I'm going to intentionally try and go through this quickly because if I start talking about LPM, it'll be 10:30 at night before I'm done taking a breath. I've been implementing LPM in SAFE since 2014. There wasn't a lot of guidance back then. It wasn't until I think 2019 that Rich created the first version of the LPM class. Back when it first came out in 4.6, I personally loved that class. You basically brought a group of leaders through it, and you came out of the class with some artifacts that had already started your LPM journey. That didn't scale well because back in 2019, I could count on one hand the number of people I knew that had experience implementing LPM with SAFE. And so they've streamlined things. The market said, hey, we need more guidance on LPM. And so they did. And so you've got things like the strategic portfolio review and the portfolio sync and guidance around all that stuff. For me, the way I started doing it is the way I've still been doing it, which is, you know how to do portfolio management or you wouldn't be in business. 2, you've got a leadership team that cares about investments. And so instead of trying to replace that, augment it with values and principles and practices and patterns that allow them to get more out of those investments. And starting off by scrutinizing them. The intent of the word epic back in the day was to represent an opportunity. And over the years, it's kind of, that message has gotten obscured, and people will say the word initiative. And initiative was very popular in the big corporations who were buying bulk licenses for SAFE. Why? Because it's just like a project, right? And so I like to say your portfolio is full of opportunities and initiatives. And if you're a senior leader, if you're the chief marketing officer, right, do you really care about the stuff that's keeping the lights on? Probably not. You care about the stuff that's going to get you into new markets, that's going to build your reputation, that's going to be innovative, that's going to draw in new people, it's going to really move things forward. And so I can't think of a implementation that I've been involved in that doesn't have some sort of Shark Tank side of things, where it's seriously, Your portfolio leadership team, they cycle in, you get three of them in the hot seats, and they're the sharks. And the epic owner who's pitching this idea and the portfolio managers, they're the producers. So they're coaching both sides. They're going to prepare the person who's going to get up on stage, and they're going to prepare the sharks so they can ask some really pointed questions. But the number one thing here is for outcome-driven LPM, how fast can we change if our hypothesis isn't proven? And when I think about the types of LPM that's out there, I call it bottoms-up LPM. I'm an SPC and we've had success with SAFE, and LPM sounds cool and we could use LPM. I can see the value it brings. So I'm going to go turn in all of my credibility, all my chits to get the director of the PMO to maybe become a VMO and let me implement LPM. And so we're going to stand up a portfolio Kanban in our tooling, and we're going to use this form, we're going to do that form, we're going to start having this ceremony and that ceremony. You'll get some benefit out of doing that, but you'll hit a ceiling pretty quick. For me, instead, it's, hey, senior leaders, what are you trying to accomplish? Okay, what stops you today? What are the outcomes you're working towards? All right, how do we look at having you guys, men and women doing this, understand different processes, but also different patterns like lean startup and lean and systems thinking and taking an economic view and Richardson's work to be able to do more and make better strategic decisions. And that type of portfolio is completely different. When SAFE 5.0 came out, they added LPM at the top of the little implementation roadmap. That was from AT&T. There's a use case, AT&T and a couple other places that showed the power of having that up front. That was not bottoms up. That was basically the leadership team says, hey, we need to make a massive difference in the market fast, and we're willing to do whatever it takes. Okay, work differently at the portfolio level while we're learning to work differently at the execution level. So that portfolio shift, right? Instead of this, what's our plan? How much are we spending? How do we stay in scope? Defining it all up front. Now it's what opportunities are we investing in? And I use that word opportunity very intentionally because when you think about an opportunity, it intrinsically means you don't know everything. And when LPM is implemented in a way where you decide almost everything up front, you go in there with an idea. One of the things I find myself reminding people of is, okay, you got this person who has this idea and you know how you're planning on implementing it. To truly care for that, you need to look at, what if we bought it off the shelf? What if we hired another company to build it all for us? What if? Build, buy, acquire, reuse. Those are all things that need to be determined during the analysis step. And instead, what happens is someone puts in, here's the idea and here's the approach, gets the stamp of approval, and either they go to market with something that meets the needs, but maybe doesn't set them up for future success, or doesn't meet the needs. And that causes task orders and reworks and all sorts of other stuff, right? So is this delivering traction? Should we pivot? Should we persevere? Should we stop? We want to answer all those questions. And that's part of that portfolio shift. And this idea of measuring what matters, right? We have output metrics, we have process metrics, we have outcome metrics, and we have just the actual business or mission impact. The very first ART I launched in the government was in 2019. And in the first inspect and adapt, at the end of the first PI, the GS-15, he said, we've saved more lives. That's impact. That is what I remember about that the most. It wasn't about the bumps and bruises in the agile metrics. It was about the fact that they found another way of working. They honed in on what the warfighter needed, and they delivered it faster with higher quality, and the result was felt in theater. That's what I'm talking about. Now, getting that level of clarity in the private sector can be difficult depending on your industry, but we oftentimes will measure the things that are easy to measure. And when you talk about bringing the business in, they're speaking a whole different language. They're talking in the private sector, they're talking about the rule of 40, right? How many SPCs know what the rule of 40 is? Or you say EBITDA, and they're like, what, huh, what? We're looking at our outcomes for PI planning. And those are fantastic outputs, but we'll see patterns out there where, well, we don't use, I share this more often than I like to admit, we don't use PI objectives because we have features. Those are completely different things. Features are the work items that you do that lead to the outcomes that you're committing to. The outcomes are those PI objectives. And they're intrinsically flexible. We're going to do this by this, so it'll do this, right? But if this feature isn't the right feature, then we throw it away and we do a different one and we still accomplish our outcome. And so those types of things and thinking about that measure what matters. One of the things, this whole idea of LPM and VMO must align. The VMO, you can, it's a crude term, but lipstick on a pig. I've seen, I did a talk a few years ago. I haven't used that term in a long time because it is crass. Back in 2020, 21, I saw a lot of people who declared success with LPM. And I looked at it and this is actually less efficient than what you used to do because you had a pretty smooth model here for your funding and for your allocation and all that stuff. And now you've just cluttered it with new terminology and new forms that nobody really uses. So you've added overhead, right? And that slows down delivery, right? It focuses on compliance. Did you do an epic hypothesis statement? If nobody's actually going to say no and nobody's going to measure the impact, then why waste your time on an epic hypothesis statement? Because somebody's just making a decision and telling you to go do it. So whether or not it succeeds or not, they're going to define that anyway. So why bother with the extra stuff, right? But VMO as integrators, and this is where the shift comes in, is that they go from being drivers to being shepherds. And that's a mindset shift. And oftentimes I hold back that term VMO and I'll have a very blunt conversation with the people leading the PMO and say, look, are you ready to become a VMO? Because the words that you've used in the PMO, driving, accountability, managing, they're different with the VMO. Facilitates, right? Facilitation, supports. It's a much different role. And so you need the VMO to integrate because they're the ones that help with that translation layer. They help with that glue between strategy and execution. LPM sets the strategy, VMO clears the path, and that allows value to move faster. And it's also why when I help implement LPM and I'm working with senior leaders, the VMO doesn't become a barrier. However, when I try to support people who are trying to go from an ART up through the VMO or PMO, now you've got a gatekeeper to senior leadership, and that doesn't work. Now, having said that, I went back to AT&T as a consultant in late 2017, and wasn't the plan, but I ended up helping a business unit turn things around, and it became a massive success story for Scaled Agile and for AT&T. My client Candace, she ended up telling that story at the 2018 SAFE Summit, but it talked about this turnaround. The chief marketing officer saying, okay, you've delivered more value now than you did the entire previous year. And that was in May. It was massive success. And one of those things was implementing LPM. Candace had 30 coaches working as part of her COE, and she wanted me to mentor them in LPM. How many of them do you think were accepted by that leadership team? Very few. Why? Because they just wanted to talk about SAFE. And they wanted to show how smart they were when it came to SAFE, or maybe they were like a puppy dog jumping up and down because they're talking to a senior executive. And so there's a whole other demeanor and communication style that's necessary to engage leaders. And that's something that the director of your PMO, the leader of your VMO, that those project managers, they have those skills. And so as an SPC, you can learn from those individuals who know how to work and thrive in that sometimes political hotbed of senior leadership. And so you need that in order to succeed with LPM. And that kind of gets us into this new era of leadership, right? We want clear leadership logic. We don't want just agile language. We want substance over appearance. I did a talk a few years ago called, this cheesy name, like Turbocharge SAFE with Executive Engagement. The message behind that talk was you need support to implement SAFE, but if you can have engagement, it's a whole different thing. And so it's that your leaders aren't just paying the bills or supportive or letting you do it. They're leading in this. They're part of this. And they lead by example. They model that behavior. And you're going to see more and more stuff come out. The new leadership and culture discipline is going to talk more about this and moving towards outcomes. So I think I've got most of the stuff that you wanted to know, right? You're not stuck. You're not alone. This is the place where smarter SAFE is coming up, those things that you asked about. And as you move forward, be a translator, not just a trainer, right? Bridge those languages between business and technology. Be a strategist, not just a scrum whisperer or an art expert, right? You need to understand how to connect what you're doing in execution to the business or the mission goals. And be an investor, right? Would you spend your money on this with what you know today? Would you pay for this? And a lot of times the answer might be, I don't know. And if it's not yes, as Oprah says, it's no, right? I think it was my wife told me Oprah said that. So I don't know if it's really Oprah or not said that, but you know what I'm saying. And be that investor. So in closing, safe isn't dead. Our comfort zones should be. If you're an SPC that expects to make your living by being embedded at a single art for 2 years, that market has shrunk. That ship has sailed. What I've found is that clients are realizing that they need to invest in their own people. The government, right? There's a new micro credential coming out, Safe for Government Roles and Responsibilities. One of the things that we teach in that micro credential is the fact that you need some of these roles on the government side. Don't outsource your product managers, right? You need to have some of these roles inside. You need to have build that muscle to have internal government SPCs as a company. Don't rely on people like myself long term. You want to build that muscle internally. Find somebody. You're going to pay for a consultant. Ask who can they mentor while they're here. And you need your leaders to shape how this is going. That executive engagement is essential. And finally, understanding the organizational complexity. SAFE's a framework. People seem to forget this. SAFE's a framework. And intrinsically, that means take what you need, leave what you don't. But people don't realize that. Here's the rub, though. You need to understand why is SAFE recommending it? Because by the time it actually got into the framework, it's been tested, it's been tried, and it's a success pattern. So why is it in there? What are the short-term and long-term implications if I don't do that? Hey, we're going to organize around VPs instead of organizing around value. Can you still have some success? Yes, but you'll hit a ceiling sooner. You'll start, somebody said dependencies, right? Massive dependencies, 90% of the time tracks back to the way you're organized. So what questions do you have here?
We are good for time here. We have a full 30 minutes. So certainly let's take the opportunity to hammer Phil with some questions here. We got something unprecedented here, folks. So go ahead and take advantage of it.